Um, the Indians in what is today the United States. Now, when I was a kid, the United States history books left out New Mexico, but they shouldn't have, because New Mexico is, after all, part of the United States. They talk about the Jamestown colony, the Plymouth colony. Today's history books talk about New Mexico. In the area of New Mexico and Arizona lived the Pueblo Indians. The Pueblo Indians lived inside clefts of the rock, you know, cracks in the rock, and they built their homes out of stone, carved them out of stone. To get to their homes, you had to climb a ladder that consists of wooden sticks. So they drill holes into the side of drill holes in the rock, and then put wooden sticks, and use these wooden sticks as ladders. Now there was a catch to it. Before you started climbing up to their homes, you had better know which sticks were strong and which ones were not, because to help keep their enemies from climbing the stones, to help keep them from climbing the ladder, some of the sticks would not hold a person's weight. So you might just start climbing and all of a sudden hit a bunch of sticks that wouldn't hold your weight, and down to the bottom you go. So their own tribe people, they knew which sticks were strong enough to hold you. But anyway, the Pueblo Indians lived in what you might call strongholds, dwelling houses. A problem that they had, though, was eventually the climate dried up. Now, folk, we can imagine. I mean, we're going through some of this now in California, but where the rains would come, then all of a sudden one year the rains would quit coming. Well, you had two choices. Either you moved where the rains were coming or you stayed put. And the decision to move was a hard one to make. What they would do is they'd stay put as long as they could, and each year the rains would not come. And they'd keep hoping that maybe someday the rain would come back. Eventually some of the rains did, but these things, of course, they've learned went in cycles. But some of them would not stay put, and they'd get out and move to some other place where there was rainfall, or somewhere where they could find some kind of sustenance. Now, in the eastern part of the United States lived the woodland Indians. The woodland Indians lived in wigwams that somewhat resemble this. They would take a bunch of trees and bend them over and tie them together at the top, and they'd keep doing this all the way down, and had it long and fairly straight, unlike the Plains Indians who lived in teepees, where they take a bunch of sticks and again tie them together at the top and surround the sticks with either deer hides or buffalo hides. But the woodland Indians lived in this area here of what is the northeastern United States. And of course, there were hundreds of tribes. I recall my brother and my dad and I got together and we tried to name all the Indian tribes we could think of. The fact is, there were hundreds upon thousands of them, really. And a bunch of them are known to eventually become extinct. I mean, there's a famous book, The Last of the Mohicans. They became extinct, but the Indian tribes became extinct one after another, owing to two things. Their women did not have very many children, for one, and for another, the average lifespan of the American Indian. Now, we know this from studying the grave sites. The average lifespan appears to have been about 18 years. That means they had a lot of children die. Now, the persons who lived to be 10 or 15, their average might have been closer to 30. Now, of course, like everyone else, they had people who lived to be in their 70s and 80s, like everybody else does. But on the average, their lifespan was quite low, and this contributed to their dying out. Now, all right, folk. Did I mention that the Vikings were the first Europeans to come across? As far as we know, the Vikings came from the area of the world we call Scandinavia. Now, a few things I want to mention. Oh yeah, Copan, that's that city in among the Maya that I personally happened to visit. The Indian Mountains in Georgia, I know of one. It's at Echota, about 40 miles up I-75 from here. Take I-75 north, and it's near Cartersville on your left if you go north. Now, about the mountains, folk. Last night I had a difficult time getting to sleep, so I turned on this same computer and tuned to a YouTube and thought, what would I like to listen to? I'd like to listen to what this man says about the North American Indians. He talked about the mounds. Now your book says the mounds were for burial. What I did not know about that big serpent mound in Ohio that's 10 miles long, it slithers around. It's not just a burial ground, folk. It turns out it was a calendar. It told them when to plant. I mean, you know, when the sun was hit at a certain angle, that was time to plant. When the sun hit another crook in the serpent, that was time to harvest. It predicted eclipses of both the sun and the moon. A remarkable feat of geometry. Now, the Indians themselves said about these mound builders that the people who built them were not Indians, that they were a different race entirely, who came for a while and then lasted hundreds of years and just abruptly disappeared. I don't know how much of that I believe, but the man also said something else about the mounds, that if you'd had 10,000 men moving the dirt that was necessary to build some of them, it would have taken 10,000 men about 1,000 years to build them. Either they had a bigger population than we realize, or they had earth-moving techniques that we still don't know. Yes?
Okay, I'm just curious. You were talking about a mountain chain through Ohio.
Yeah, a mound in Ohio. They didn't realize, so they got in the airplane and realized, looked down from an airplane and, hey, this is a rattlesnake.
Oh.
Yeah, it's 10 miles from head to tail, but it's not straight. It coils around. And the certain coils in the serpent's body tell them when the sun hits at a certain angle, it tells them when to plow, when to plant, in other words, and predicts eclipses. No, it was an advanced astronomical object also.
Yeah, I'm just from Pennsylvania. I was just curious to where, like, exactly you were.
The Serpent Mound is in Ohio.
Do you know where at in Ohio?
I don't. Even though, I'll tell you what, though. I'm going to make sure I have an answer for you on Monday. I'll do my best. Serpent Mound.
Because I know they have a lot of big mountains.
Oh, they have a lot of them. And some of them are, in Pennsylvania too,
Yeah,
are huge.
Especially.
I mean, it take up more space than the Great Pyramid itself. And some of them are pyramid shaped, some of them are shaped of steep pyramid, where they go up a little ways, flatten off, go up some more. I mean, how many men did it take to build them, and how long did it take? And again, if they, of course, I think the ancients knew earth moving and stone moving techniques, and one of them has a 60-ton stone in its foundation that's as big as the stone that makes there's the biggest stone in the Great Pyramid. Folks, you can't get enough men around a stone like that to move it. You simply can't. Now, of course, unlike in Egypt, North America does have a lot of forest. So you might say, well, they rolled it on logs. We've tried that, and the log only lasts about 3 or 4 rolls and has to be replaced. It damages the log extensively. But nevertheless, I personally doubt that they rolled it on logs either. Rolling is something 60 tons on logs would require a paved, flat road. Then how did it do it? Beats me, yes.
I was watching the History Channel the other day, and they were explaining about the pyramids.
Yeah.
And they were saying how what they did is they put water in the sand, and when sand is...
I've heard that too. Put water on the sand and scoot it along. I've heard that too. That does not explain how they raised the stones up 200, 300, and 400 feet. Now, the last time I checked about that, it said they actually built the Great Pyramids in Egypt from inside. They simply slid the stones up a ramp inside. That way they did not build a causeway. And the ramp itself became part of the structure. But so far we've not dug deep enough inside any one of the pyramids to notice any kind of a ramp. Anything, I mean, okay, we're trying to figure this out. It's okay to figure, but every angle we figure from has some compelling reason why it can't possibly be true. Okay, I'll tell you something about sliding something in the sand. When I was a kid, I drove a lot on mud roads. Today, I avoid them like the plague. I got many a car stuck in the mud. The car does not roll easily on soft ground. I don't know if any of you have ever been stuck in the mud before, but it's no fun. I mean, we'd have tractors come and help pull us out. The tractors, of course, had these big wheels. So what I'm getting at is, it seemed like the stones would also stick in the sand if they tried to swim along, unless somehow the sand was super hard. Because when you put the water on it, it becomes soft. All right, but I've heard that theory too, and I've also heard that they dissolved the stone in some kind of acid and then put it in place in liquid form, and then it hardened again like cement. I have reasons why I doubt that, because you can do that with concrete, but you can't do it with stone. I've also heard they had a basis that was resonant at a certain sonic frequency, and they get a pitch at that frequency, and it would cancel out the pull of gravity enough to where they could, the vibration would cancel out the pull of gravity enough to where they could raise the stone with enough men. Now this might not make a lot of sense, and this leaves some gaps unexplained, but nevertheless, supposedly, if you hit a stone with the right pitch, the right frequency, it will somewhat lighten up to where a few men could lift it and move it. Have any of you heard this clearly?
Yeah.
The one I noticed you nodding your head. Yeah, you've heard that one before too. And the right vase could be resonant at the right pitch. And having studied radio electronics, I understand what resonance is. It means that the sound would hit one wall and bounce right at another wall to right where it's supposed to, and it could keep bouncing for a long time, the same sound, and it could project itself outward for quite a ways. All right. Now, right in this classroom, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, I got into an argument with a young man. It's something I try to avoid doing now, but I got talking about, he was so concerned we were cutting down trees. I did not know at the time, but one of the textbooks that we have used said that there were the North American Indians burned so much forest land that they made an impact on the environment. And today, we have far out and away more trees in North America than there were in 1492. And I can understand why they would do this, and here's why. Number one, they had no way to control the fires. But number two, they would want to burn the place down because if a forest fire got started, they would all be burned up in the fire because they could not outrun the fire. So they burned away millions and millions of acres of forest land and left this area of North America somewhat wide open with just a few trees. And probably the purpose was for safety reasons. But they made an impact on the environment. Now, I mean, folk here, he drew a little map of Georgia and said, now here, when they cut out a parking lot, they're cutting down so much trees. Does anybody see what's wrong with his illustration now? The scale is wrong. A parking lot and a map of Georgia this size would not even, and folk had to remind them, if you get in an airplane and fly over Georgia and look down, what do you see? The only thing you can see, I mean, folk, I've done it a few times stuff, there's only one thing you can see, and that's trees. Except maybe even in the big cities, you can't see much of the city for seeing the trees. Trees all over the place. And I told him the next class, he got up and walked out of class. I said to him the next class, I said, on my way home, I looked around in my car to see if I could spot any trees. And I was looking at trees all the way home. I couldn't count them. I mean, you know, they can't be counted. Anyway, the North American Indians made a big impact on their environment. All right. Now, folk, one other thing I want to say before I leave this topic. It's time for me to go on to Islam. Yesterday was Columbus Day, and I was reminded that a lot of people want to abolish Christopher Columbus from our history books because they say he was the biggest mass murderer in all of history. From what I understand about the situation that happened, the American Indians themselves drew the first blood. I mean, Columbus, and the initial contact between him and India was friendly. He took some Indians back to Spain with him, but unfortunately he had an 11-year-old boy at the helm of his ship, and this 11-year-old boy dashed the Santa Maria to pieces, where two seas come together, and this 11-year-old couldn't handle the ship. So he dashed to pieces. So Columbus left half his crew on the island of Hispaniola, and when Columbus came back with 17 ships, went back to the place where he left his crew, he found his crew was all dead. they'd been slain by Indians. Now, we don't know who drew the first blood, but from the Spanish point of view, it looked like the Indians had. Now, this led to 300 years of conflict. And folk, you can argue with me if you want to, I won't argue back. I really think that a lot of the conflict was not the fault so much of the Europeans, it was the fault of the Indians themselves. This may sound like street talk, I'm going to put it this way, they did it to themselves before the white men came along and finished doing it to them. What do you mean? Well, if you had been with Cortez and heard the hideous screams coming from the temple, what would you have done? Today's political correctness says, oh, if that's their way of worship, who are we to say that we're any better? Let them do it. Cortez did not see things that way at all. He believed it was his duty to put a stop to it, and he did. The Europeans were invited to come over by some of the Indian tribes, and when they got here, the Indians tried to kill them. And the Europeans had basically three choices: either die, or go back to Europe, or fight. Most of them chose to fight. The clashes were greatly unequal. The Indians hardly had a chance. Now, in the case of the Pueblo, now, this was a case where that some of the Indians at least won initially. The Pueblo Indians got hold of the horses that the Spanish had accidentally let loose, and these horses ran wild. Well, the Pueblo found a way to capture them. Horses can be tamed as full-grown animals. You may know that they can be broken into and tamed from adulthood. So the Indians would tame the horses. Then the Indians bartered the white man for guns. So the Indians got the guns, got the horses. And initially, the Indians won. The Indians whipped the Spanish. Well, Mexico revolted against Spain, and the Mexicans tried to subdue the Indians in New Mexico. The Indians won again. Then came the Americanos, in other words, the Americans. And the Americans came in such big numbers that the Indians simply could not handle them. I mean, just wave after wave after wave of Americanos. And the Indians simply succumbed. The problem was not that they lacked guns. The problem was they lacked organization and they lacked the numbers. To ask the white man to have stayed away when there was all this fertile land and the possibility of gold and possibility of silver, which was here, to tell Europeans they should stay at home, folk, that's simply going against everything that's human about human nature. If you had lived then, if you would not have come across the ocean, your brother would have, your sister would have, or your cousins would have. There was simply no way that what happened could have happened any differently. And again, a large part of the blame. Now, folk, I say this tongue in cheek because in my own personal life, I mean, I've been keeping a journal for many years, and I have it written in my journal in November 1972. It's their fault. It's their fault. Then I learned something. No, I finally met the enemy. The enemy was me. When I realized that my social problems were my fault, only then did I begin to pull myself up in my set of bootstraps, and only then did my lot in life improve. You can blame the other fellow all you want to, but you must take responsibility. The Indians, again, looking at it as objectively as I could, I think a lot of the problem was their fault. For embracing communism, I mean, they didn't know better, but they embraced communism, and that's why they went down from being these massive, massive mound builders to the tribal peoples that we met when Columbus first came over. And communism also has a knack for a big decrease in population, and ultimately, people who embrace it wind up being conquered. All right, should we stop celebrating Columbus Day? I don't think so. He was a good navigator. He was a bold adventurer. He was an explorer. He went into the unknown. And I have to say I admire him for that, which is what all of humanity should do. All right, I'm going to move on, unless somebody has a comment. I mean, one of the biggest discussions we ever had one time had to do with this topic. Was a white man right? Was a white man wrong? I say that the white man did what human beings will do under those conditions. Go in and take over. All right, chapter 7, Islam. All right. Okay. All right, now. In my morning class, I have a few sleepy heads, and they tend to want to go to sleep around 8:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning. But when I started talking about Islam, everybody in the class woke up. Now, folk, this is the one, I mean, I'm devoting 2 lessons to it. I mean, the first year as I taught, I only devoted 1. But it's important. When I was a kid, we ignored Islam. When I was younger, oh, we talked about it, you know, but it was just, we talked about it and then moved on. It was not important to us. I mean, I have a history book at home, a college level history book for for college juniors entitled Recent American History. And it dealt with American history of 1900, 1969, and the Islamic world did not even get a paragraph. Got a little bit of mention, but not even 1 paragraph in 700 pages. That's how important it was to us, even on a college level. Now today, that has changed drastically. Oh yeah, one of the 12 books I had to read was a book about the Muslims. And it said, at the end of the book, there's some rumbling in the Muslim world. I mean, this was written in the 1960s. And we don't know where this rumbling will lead to, but there is some rumbling that indicates the Muslim world might move forward. Well, that's happening now. But nobody could have predicted where it would lead. Now, I want to say before I start, you start talking about religion. And if you think I'm nervous about the topic, you're very right. If you think I'm scared stiff about the topic, you're absolutely right. Nevertheless, there's some things that must be said because it is extremely important in today's world. And I'm much aware there might be some Islamic students in this room. I'm not going to ask you. I don't want to be offensive. I mean, I will tell you something. When I was in the Army, they sang songs that were offensive to me and my religious beliefs. When I went to UT, the professor said a lot of stuff that were offensive to my religious beliefs. Nobody thinks a thing about saying anything that's offensive against Christians in America anymore. No, we don't talk against Islam. Give me the freedom to speak, I'll give you the freedom. And I don't mean to be offensive, even though it's difficult to speak anymore without offending somebody. All right, Islam. With that as a background, I'll start. This part of the world had been united from time to time. It had been united under Sargon, under Hammurabi, under Nebuchadnezzar, under Cyrus the Great, and then most recently under Alexander. From 300 BCE with Alexander until 600 CE, 900 years, this part of the world was fragmented. Then, for a couple generations, it was all united again under Islam. Then it fragmented again. That's the way your book opens. Muhammad was born in the year 570 CE. But his followers were able to unite this area from Spain to the Indus Valley, a much bigger empire than anyone's except for possibly, actually it's a bigger empire than Alexander's. But they fragmented. The story of Islam begins in Arabia, right here, and that's the reason I had you learn where it is. Located right here just east of Africa. Arabia, though, is an extension of the Great Sahara Desert, owing to the fact that the desert keeps the rain clouds from getting through to here and also keeps them from getting through to here. The Red Sea doesn't do much to provide the rain that the Atlantic Ocean does. So it's a desert country. The people who live in deserts are called Bedouins. Now, the word Bedouin is similar to the word nomad, except nomad means oftentimes anybody who roams from place to place, including people who don't live in a desert. The word Bedouin usually is only applied to people who live in North Africa, the Sahara Desert and the Arabian Desert, and does not generally apply to other nomads who live other places. We don't know much about the history of Arabia before Muhammad. Several historians had mentioned it. Several people had visited, but since the Arabians originally did not write, what we know comes from outside sources. Rome had conquered it, but then had to let it go. Now, the Silk Road usually went up through here, but in times of conflict, like the conflict between the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, the Silk Road changed routes and took a southerly route and went through the northern part of Arabia in order to escape the conflict. All right, this was great and wonderful for some of the Arabs because it meant some of the Arabs got rich owing to the trade that occurred along the Silk Road. Now, some of the Arabs became traders and again got wealthy at it. Their religion originally was polytheistic, that is, they worshiped many, many gods. Now, folk, here's the point. I mean, your book says one thing, I have heard another. Your book states that Allah was the chief god of all of them. I have heard that Allah was really just nothing more than one of the many tribal deities. But be that as it may, Allah was one of their gods. In the city of Mecca, there was a stone around the Kaaba, and I'm going to write that in cursive because it's a foreign word. This stone supposedly fell down from heaven. Perhaps it did, probably a meteorite. It's because it's a sacred stone, nobody's been allowed to examine it, so we do not know if it were a meteorite or not. But likely it was a meteorite that fell down from the sky. Most meteorites burn up. But this one survived. The bigger ones survive. And every once in a while, a meteorite will come down from the sky that will survive. All right. Now, pardon me for jumping around a little bit, but the Kaaba made news last month because the Muslims feel like they should visit it once in a lifetime, and every once in a while the crowd gets completely out of hand, and 1,400 of them died when a bunch of them trampled other ones of them to death. They trampled each other to death. Perhaps, yeah, some of you nodding your head like you heard that. I don't know if anyone in morning class had heard it, but this is not the first time this has happened. Several times throughout recent history, the crowds have gotten out of control and hundreds of people have died. Again, they believe they should make a pilgrimage to the Kaaba at least once in their lifetime. Now, around the Kaaba were 360 idols. One idol for every day of the year. You might say, hey, I thought there were 365 days here. Yeah, today there are. But their calendar only had 360 days, and some people believe that originally there are only 360 days in the year, which explains why we have 360 degrees in circumference. And then, due to the flood and maybe some other catastrophes, the earth was slowed down, and we now have 365 days in the year. But there were 360 idols. Muhammad destroyed all these idols, by the way, and made the Muslim people monotheist. Now, these Arab people would crowd around an oasis. And if you know anything about the desert, there's sometimes water holes in the desert, and these water holes will hold plant life, and people would come over to the oasis and build cities, or build small towns, not really cities. But what the Arabs would do to each other, they would try to sneak up, usually at night, because, I mean, let's face it, in a desert there's no place to hide. They sneak up at night on an unsuspecting oasis town, neighboring town, grab everything they could grab and run. And this was the way that they often treated each other. Now, again, most of the Arabs grew up poor. However, there came a time when some of them became rich, including Mohammed, and this really set Mohammed off to become rich. I'll explain in a minute why. But for something else I want to get to about the religion, very important. Their religion has no priest. Now, oh yes, they do have clergymen, what we might call preachers. They call them Ayatollah, and the word Ayatollah can be translated reverend. But no priest. Well, what's a priest? A priest, the concept of priest means that the ordinary person is just not wise enough or holy enough to go before God. Therefore, you need a mediator. So the priest mediates between you and God. The Muslims said everybody can worship, so therefore there's no need for priests. This was to hinder them in converting the Africans, because the Africans insisted that there be priests. Nevertheless, they have no priests to this day, no priestly mediators. Everyone takes part, everyone prays directly to God without the need of a mediator. Something now that happened just before Muhammad, well, a couple of things. There were constant wars between the Byzantine Empire over here and the Persian Empire here. Very important, because that played a big role in what was to happen later. And also, a lot of time, I'll tell you something, having grown up in poverty, we were taught the rich were snakes, the rich got rich by evil means, they got rich by stealing, the rich were evil. Well, in Arabia, there all of a sudden came into being a wealthy merchant class, living alongside the still poor Bedouins. And this created a class conflict of sorts, because the two classes hate each other. Well, what would happen if a man was born into the poor Bedouin class and then grew up and suddenly became rich himself? This was what happened to Muhammad. And it created a whole lot of mental conflict, and I guess I can understand why. Muhammad was orphaned at the age of 6. So he grew up even poorer than he otherwise would have been. However, when he grew up, he married his boss, you might say. He married a woman who was a widow, who had been married to a wealthy merchant. And therefore, he married into wealth. All of a sudden, he found himself engaging in the same kind of behavior he had once criticized others for. He found himself doing the same thing he had condemned in others. And now, all of a sudden, he was doing it. It created a lot of conflict in his mind. So to resolve the conflict, he started going out in the hills. Now, I'm not going to say he went out in the woods. There are no woods in Arabia. But he went out in a solitary place in the desert, in the hills, to meditate, to pray. And while there, according to his own account, the archangel Gabriel appeared to him and gave him a revelation. Now, he believed, he was told that Jesus and Moses, well, Moses first and Jesus second, only received part of the revelation. But he, Muhammad, was being given the rest. And it was his duty to carry his religion to the whole world. Well, he showed what he had been revealed to some priests, the Christian priests, and they laughed at him. He showed it to the Jewish rabbis, and they laughed at him. So he wound up getting the Christians and Jews, who became antagonistic to both. But anyway, he first went to Mecca, his own city, after being laughed at by the Christians and Jews. He went to his own city of Mecca, and the Meccans refused to believe him. So he fled from the city of Mecca and went to Medina. I believe that can be pronounced Medina. The flight from Mecca to Medina is called the Hijrah, and it might be misspelling that. Anyway, this marks the beginning of the Muslim calendar. They count time from the day that Muhammad made his flight from Mecca to Medina. Medina was about, I guess 300 or 400 miles away. And his flight is known as the H-I-J, how about that? H-I-J-R-A-H. I'll spell that differently. H-I-J-R-A-H. the flight. All right. The people of Medina listened to him, and he converted the people of Medina. Well, all right, having done that, he then got the people of Medina, the men of Medina, together and formed an army and went back to Mecca, his original city. And this was the beginning of converting the people of his enemy by force. He converted them at sword point, fire and sword, they call it. He conquered Mecca. He destroyed all the 360 idols that were around Mecca, but the stone itself, the sacred shrine, the stone, he saved. Well, he was kind of top of the world at this point. His armies began conquering other oasis towns. But 2 years after he conquered Mecca, he himself died. His uncle took over, pardon me, his father-in-law, not his uncle, his father-in-law, his wife's father took over. And his wife's father's name was Abu Bakr. I'm not going to write that down, it won't be on the test. In a short time, though, under the rule of Abu Bakr, all of Arabia was conquered. And the religion then was poised to spread rapidly throughout the Near East. All right. Now, folk, I must say, I've made reference to the test. All right. And I should have announced this beginning of class, but I'll announce it now. The test is made out. Now, it has one problem. Our secretary's husband is very ill. And I did not realize when I sent the print up to print shop, she has to approve it. If she doesn't approve it, it might be late. Okay, so it's scheduled to be held on Monday, 12 days from now. If it's not back from the print shop, we'll just have to put it off. And also, it's a test like the first two you took, if that answers what you're about to ask. It's like, it has some answers on the bottom, on the back page, but it's basically going to consist of 27 questions, and they're the fill in the blank type. If at all possible, for put a place. I'll give you at least 2 points for just put up the correct place, or even where a person lived. Put the place where he lived. Put the place. So like Mohammed, Arabia. If you put that much, I'd give you 2 points. Place I'm concerned with. Some of these things on the test will be maybe towns, nations, Indian tribes. The test consists of chapters 7, 8, and 9. Now, here is one question I'm going to give, and I won't give an answer right now. I have been giving answers out a little bit throughout. The bonus question for 10 points. Everybody ready?
Yes.
Here's the bonus. Give me 5 differences between Islam and the United States Constitution. There are actually more than that. 5 differences. I'm not going to answer them directly. This came up recently at presidential squabble. Some presidential candidates made a squabble back and forth. 5 differences between Islam and the United States Constitution. You have to know a little bit about both in order to answer that. And again, that's like your homework assignment. Be looking that up. 10 points. 2 points for each real difference. All right. Again, I should have announced that at the beginning of the class. Okay. Now, about Muhammad's personal life, folk. Particularly his marriage, as long as his first wife lived, he was believed to have been faithful to her. Then when his wife died, he took on numerous wives. I don't know how many, but quite a few. And one of his wives was a 9-year-old girl. Now before you think he was a pedophile, I want to remind you, this practice was very, very common in that part of the world. And it was even done in Europe. Now here's what happened in Europe. Sometimes in Europe, a noble person might inherit an estate at 7 years old. And the neighboring noble woman, let's say a young boy was 7 and his parents died. So he was actually heir to his father's dukedom at 7. This happened at least one time. So some neighboring countess might say, hey, I'll marry him. And they would actually marry a 7-year-old boy just in order to get hold of their hands on his estate. This actually went on. And also, fast forward to the year 2015, child marriages are very common in this part of the world. So Muhammad, in that case, was somewhat of a man of his day. I mean, I have to say this much, and not in his defense so much, but just, you know, if you hear that he married a 9-year-old, yes, but this was a common practice at the time. All right, leaving that, oh yeah, Muhammad wrote his writings in a book called the Quran. Oops, I started to spell it. All right, in the old days, it was spelled like this. Today, we spell it Quran. Again, now, there is a little bit of controversy. Authors hint at it. According to standard Islamic belief, Muhammad wrote the Quran himself, and he wrote it one time, and he got it right the first time. But recent research has found evidence that actually was written, and then written again, changed and altered, and then changed some more and written again. And what we have today is not exactly the original Quran. Now, again, if you're Islamic, you'll dispute that right away, and I can't blame you because I understand something about the strong religious beliefs myself. But modern scholars who are outside of Islam will question whether it actually was all written at one time and only written once and never changed. But again, the Islamic people insist that it has never, ever changed from the time it was first written down till now. All right. When Muhammad died, he never did clarify who was to be the successor, and this has led to numerous fights among Islam all down through time. Anyway, initially, a member of his own family took over. Abu Bakr, his father-in-law, was made caliph. And Abu Bakr started the practice of conducting raids called jihad. In other words, these were raids against enemies or people who were not Muslims. Just get on your horseback with your mounted cavalry and swoop down on a town that was not able to defend against you. The word jihad has come to mean holy war, or strive for the Lord, strive for Allah. Anyway, the United Arab Tribes burst out from the peninsula, and they found waiting for them the Persians and the Byzantines, but the Persians and Byzantines had been fighting for hundreds of years. They fought a big war finally where the Persian Empire lost. The Byzantines finally defeated the Persians, but both sides were weakened. The Muslims found both sides weakened. They were not initially able to conquer the Byzantine Empire. However, they defeated a Byzantine army that was 4 times their size. The Byzantine army had outnumbered 4-1. But the very fierce Muslims were able to defeat them, send them running, and they went on to conquer Persia. And it was to be many years before they conquered the Byzantine Empire. Having conquered Persia, though, they spread out. They conquered Syria. Then they went on into Egypt and conquered all of North Africa. Having conquered all of North Africa, they then proceeded into Europe. They never conquered all of Spain. Now, they did conquer part of Spain, and they were to be in Spain for some 700 years. But here's where they ran into a problem, folks. And this is one of the reasons they were never able to really conquer the world. There were 2. One reason, though, was the type of fighting they did only worked in the desert. Now I'm going to go to an extreme here. Supposing a Muslim army had invaded the jungles of Vietnam and tried to conquer the Vietnamese people, they would have lost miserably. The type of fighting they did, swooping down on horseback with drawn swords, ready to hack enemies, does not work in a jungle. Now, if the Vietnamese had attacked them in the desert, the Vietnamese would have been clobbered. All right, but if they had invaded Vietnam, the Vietnamese would have clobbered them. I mean, we know, the French have learned, the Americans have learned, the Vietnamese know how to fight in their own territory, using their own jungle as an advantage. They know what to do. All right. So they were cut stopped in Spain because Spain, let's face it, Spain has mountains, has trees, has bushes, has undergrowth. They simply could not swoop and conquer that much of Spain. I mean, they did get a bunch of it because they caught the weak Visigoth kingdom unprepared for them. Then they moved into France. Again, we're getting ready to pinch Europe from both east and west, trying to defeat the Byzantines in the east and the Spanish in the west. They went to France, and the book I sometimes refer you to had about the 10 most decisive battles of the world. The French met him at the Battle of Tours. The French were led by Charles Martel. Now, I want to tell you this, folks. Charles Martel in the Battle of Tours will not be on the next test, but you may see them on a test on the chapter 12, or the final exam, in other words. You very well likely will. If you don't see them, the other class will. So I'm going to introduce you to them now. When I was a child, I read a book about the Battle of Tours. It was half fiction, but the people of France were just terrified. And Charles Martel was like the prime minister. He was not the king, but he was bigger than most of the other Frenchmen. And the word got out that every one of those Moors, or Saracens they called them, those the Islam people were called Saracens in the Lord. Every one of those Saracens is bigger than Charles Martel. Well, finally, some trader came along to quiet them down and said, now listen, I got something to tell you. I've been among them, and they are no bigger than we are. They're not, and none of them are as big as Charles Martel. And they can fight well, but we can beat them. Well, they met at the Battle of Tours, and both sides fought all day long. There was no strategy in those days. This was a part of warfare where the people just got together and they fought like the best they could without any formation or any strategy. Well, nightfall fell and the fighting stopped. The French went to sleep. They assumed the Moors were going to sleep also, except when they woke up in the morning and looked around, where are the Moors? They sent out scouts and found the Moors had traveled all night long and gotten as far away from Tours as they could. Essentially, this type of people are the type that they'd fight you when they saw that you were easy prey, but they were cowards also. As soon as you stood up to them firm enough, they'd turn and run. Anyway, the Battle of Tours is where that Charles Martel stopped the advance, and the Moors never got into France. They kept trying. Now, I'm going to jump ahead of the story a little bit. What eventually happened was the fight has been going on for 1,400 years. But eventually what happened was European technology became so far ahead of Muslim technology that eventually all these Muslim countries were conquered. France conquered Algeria. Italy conquered Libya. Britain conquered Egypt. France conquered this region here. Arabia was never conquered, and neither was Morocco, but most of the Muslim world was at one point or another conquered by outsiders. Again, because their technology lagged behind. I mean, folks, it reminds me of the proverbial race between rabbit and turtle. All of you probably, I think, have heard the story. A rabbit and a turtle got into a race one day. If you heard the story, tell me who won it. The turtle won it. The rabbit decided he was so far ahead he didn't have anything to worry about, and he fell asleep and slept a long time, while the turtle just slowly kept on crawling. Slow pace, and got to the finish line ahead of the rabbit. Europeans were the proverbial, started out behind, folk. But while the rabbit slept, the turtle crept up and crept past them. All right. Anyway, and the one thing they had going for them here was that this region had been ruled by the Byzantines and Persians, and both of the Byzantines and Persians, the financial wars, taxed people heavily. The Muslims promised them lighter taxes. The Muslims also promised them a higher standard of morality, and told them they could keep their religion. However, they said keep the religion tongue-in-cheek. What the Muslims did not tell them was that if any of your sons or daughters ever convert to Islam, they're going to remain Islamic forever. There's no converting back. You can stay Christian if you want to, you can stay Jew if you want to, but if any of your family converts, it's a one-way street. And this was something that the Christians and Jews were not told at first. Also, there are a few other things that I'll deal with. Well, okay, I'll deal with them now. Christians and Jews were made second-class citizens in the areas where the Muslims occupied. Second class in that Christians and Jews were not allowed to wear hats because a hat might make them taller than a Muslim. Their houses were only supposed to be so tall. Muslim houses were to be higher. Only Muslims were allowed to ride on the back of a beast, because if a Christian or Jew got on the back of a beast, it could put him higher than a Muslim. So only Muslims. I mean, have any of you heard any of this from other sources? This actually went on in a lot of places where the Muslims conquered. I see some of you snickering, but folks, this actually went on for a while, for hundreds of years, really. So the Christians were treated like second-class citizens, and of course the conversions only went one way. You could convert to Islam, and once converted, you could never convert back. So at first, some of the Christians and Jews welcomed Arab rule, and then realized, oops, we got the bad end of the deal. Now, a big weakness in Muhammad's teaching was he never clarified who was to succeed him once he died. There was no plan of succession. All right, what this meant, eventually, well, it meant several things, but it meant, well, down through the ages, it has meant that when a caliph dies, or when a leader dies, much too often, there has been a series of bloody struggles until finally one man winds up killing the other competitors off and becoming the caliph himself by having slain all the other persons who were competing for it. This has happened much too often through the ages, but also led to the first big split of Islam between Shiite and Sunni. The one group, and folk, I'm not going to pretend I know which one. I mean, I've tried to learn it, but the one group said that only Muhammad's descendants should lead. The other group said, no, the person who should lead should be the one who's most capable, which being free translation means the one who can kill off all his competitors. But nevertheless, this has led to a split between Sunni and Shiite that is still going on to this day. And there are other differences. We have found that one group is more tolerant of new ideas than others, and we like one group, we Westerners like one group more than we do another. The one group seems to be most extreme. If I'm not mistaken, the Shiites are the ones that produce almost all the extremists, and the Sunnis are more moderate. Now, if I have it backwards, I'm sorry. But Muhammad never did specify who was to be the leader. Now, something that's not in the book, I won't take a minute to talk about, and will not be on the test either. The story of the 12 Imams. If you look in detail, first of all, there were 11 Imams, and each one of them added some teaching of his to the Islamic tradition that the Islamic people still observe. And if you look at the details, every one of these 11 Imams were either killed, they were killed. They were either killed by being poisoned by their own wives, or one of their wives, or they were killed by the local caliph, who wanted them out of the way, but none of them died a natural death. Then came Imam number 12. There are even stories that maybe he didn't even exist, but now they're saying he probably did. Imam number 12 disappeared. Supposedly he's waiting in hiding somewhere, and when the right time comes, he will come out, take over, unite the Muslim world, and go on and conquer the world. And the Muslims to this day, a lot of them are working really hard to see to it that they would pave the way for Imam number 12 to come out of hiding. When the conditions are right, he'll come out of hiding and take over the world. So you'll hear something said about the 12th Imam from time to time. That's why I thought I might ought to throw that in. By the way, have any of you heard of this, any chance? One of you had? Okay.
How do you spell it?
E-M-A-M. I'm not going to put it on a test, but it's E-M-A-M. Yeah, there was, yes.
It's supposed to be like divinity or something?
What's that?
It's supposed to be like divine? Like God?
Yeah, he's Messiah. All right, he's like the Messiah, or the Jews sometimes call him Mashiach, the anointed one. The 12th Imam is supposed to come out of hiding from wherever he's been hiding for the last more than 1,000 years. And still alive after 1,000 years. And take over, all the Muslims will flock to him. And with his help, they'll take over the world. All right, now, Your book goes on to talk about the Umayyads and the Abbasids. And folk, this is one time I'm going to tell you, don't bother to learn their names. They will not be on the test. In general, I mean, there was the typical story of the Umayyads took over first, and they lasted a while like the other dynasties. Then they became corrupt, and people didn't like them. And finally, the Abbasids overthrew them, and you know, which is typical of all of human history. But there were two dynasties back to back. But after the Abbasids fell, the Muslim world divided. Now, here's something that every Muslim deep down really knows. Well, Islam might have conquered the whole world, except after the Abbasids fell, the Islamic world fragmented. And they have spent much of their time fighting among themselves. Now fast forward to 2015, and they are still fighting extensively among themselves. So much so that Israel, with no more than about 3 million people, can survive in that sea of tens of millions of Muslims, owing to the fact that the Muslims are spending so much of their time fighting each other, they can't get freed up enough to fight the Israelis. But again, every Muslim, I think, knows this, that they would have conquered the world if they could somehow have stayed united. They couldn't. And they look for some leader to come along someday who will unite all of them, and then they will proceed to their destiny, which they believe is world takeover, a world empire. All right. Yes?
Aren't the 3 stages of Islamic conquest like infiltrate, procreate, dominate?
You are thinking more about communism than Islam, but they might have used some of this too. The communists use infiltrate, procreate. Well,
Actually, it's Islam. Okay?
Perhaps so. Well, I tell you what, it's the case of Spain. Spain spent 700 years fighting, and then finally in 1492, King Ferdinand and his wife, Queen Isabella, drove them out. I mean, they married, and she was heir to a big kingdom, and he was heir to an average-sized kingdom. But they united their kingdom and called it their nation Spain, and they drove them out. And after that, Queen Isabella felt like she could finance Columbus's trip to the New World. However, 1492, but the Muslims have come back in Spain. See, Isabella and Ferdinand drove them out. But then a later, quote-unquote, more enlightened group of Spanish allowed them to come in. And the Muslims have a rule that any country that once was ours is always ours. So they have a grudge against Spain. They have a grudge against Greece because they once had Greece. And they especially have this grudge against Israel. Because they believe if it ever was ours, it should never, nobody should ever take it from us. We're allowed to take territory from you. You are not allowed to take territory from us. Which brings me up to something else about the Muslim mindset. If some Muslims attack you and you kill that Muslim in self-defense, who's at fault in the eyes of a Muslim? You or the Muslim man who was attacking you in the first place? You are always at fault in their eyes. In other words, for defending yourself, they have a right to come in and blow you up. Just because you defended yourself. You have no right to defend yourself against them. They have all the rights on earth. You have none. This is their mindset, folk. You're always wrong. Now, folk, I want to digress here and tell you there's another side to it. Some of the most honest people you'll meet in the world. Several years ago, I had a young man come up to me and said, Mr. Cunningham, you gave me here 20 more points than I actually made on this test. Yeah, I recorded 20 points higher than he got his test back. 20 points. I said, meet me in the hallway. I said, because you were honest about it, I'm going to let you keep the points. He batted into me. Winston Churchill. Notice the first that these people, I mean, they're just so great, they live in such harmony at first, but then he took a second look at them and said, wait, now these people have a very, very, very dark side to them also. Very dark. So in other words, yes, and I've had some people tell me that some of the most honest people they've ever seen are Muslim. And they said that typically the Muslims that they meet said they look like they had never even killed a fly, that they wouldn't hurt anyone or anything. And a lot of them were that way. Peace-loving, gentle, kind, willing to help you. Very, very accommodating to you. Some of the Muslim women make some of the best grades I've ever seen on some of my tests. They don't have the distractions American women have, I mean, with all respect. They can make extremely high grades on some of my tests. So yes, there is something good I can say about them, and I want to say it. And at the same time, like Winston Churchill noticed, there is another side to them. All right. Moving on in the history of them, over the horizon came another group of Mongolians called the Turks. There were two Turks. The Seljuk Turks were one, and the Ottoman Turks were another. But basically, they took over, and the country of Turkey is now named after them. Formerly, it was called Asia Minor or Byzantium. But they took over, and they whacked away a lot of Byzantine territory. Also coming from Mongolia was Genghis Khan. I mentioned Genghis Khan. In the case of Genghis Khan, he might very well have put an end to Islam. He conquered he just clobbered and slaughtered the Islamic people. Would go to their cities, and at one point, I mean, it was so bad that he went to a city and some of the people hid, and when he got away he killed everybody he saw. But after he got away, he was told, hey, some of these people were hiding underground, and they came out. So he turned around and went back and finished off the rest of them. Just for nothing but the sheer love of killing. No other reason. I mean, he just loved to kill. But he might have stopped Islam right where he was, except that his army converted to Islam themselves. Genghis Khan and the Islamic had one thing in common. They fought from horseback, and they fought in the open, and they're fighting. But Genghis Khan's men were more fierce than the Islamic, at least the Islamic people who came later. Now, that what he could have done against the first wave of Islamic people, we don't know. But let's face it, civilization makes a person soft. Also, the Turks and the Genghis Khan's men were known for their excellent archery. Something else Genghis Khan did, he organized them into squads of 10 and said, anybody who leaves a squad of 10 in the battle will be killed. You must always know where your squad is, and you stay with your squad. And if the enemy comes to fight against you, he'll fight with everyone in the squad. There's no individual fighting here. These squads of 10 fight as a team. And he made a devastating army, much more so than the Muslims who fought like the American Indians or like the French were at Battle Tours, just one-on-one, pick out somebody who looks like his enemy and fight with him, and if you get rid of him, pick out someone else. No, Genghis Khan told his men, you fight as a team, never one-on-one alone. The Turks did one thing for the Arabs. They put an end to a lot of the squabbling in the Arab world. They came in and basically they put a temporary halt to the squabbling between Sunni and Shiite. They said, we're in charge and you're not. But they also, when they converted to Islam, they made such a rigid interpretation of the Quran that it made any kind of change and adaptation difficult. Now I'm going to close with this. The question I want to ask is, if Thomas Edison, he was the greatest inventor the West had, if Thomas Edison had been born in a Muslim country, would he have invented anything? If the Wright brothers had been born in a Muslim country, would they have invented the airplane? If Henry Ford had been born in a Muslim country, now Henry Ford did not invent the automobile, would he have ever made an automobile? It looks like none of them would have, because Islam has stifled, for the last 1,000 years, Islam has stifled technological and any form of change. A lot of the blame might go to the Turks. Mohammed actually called for scientific investigation. But here's what happens. And folks, this happens to every religious group sooner or later. Your science appears to run into conflict with theology. This happened to Christians, but in Christendom, science marched on anyway. In the Islamic world, it stopped. Science stopped it. Among the Chinese philosophers took over and they stopped the advance of the Chinese for hundreds of years. Among Christians, yes, there were conflicts between science and theology. Now, what was it that made the Islamic world so non-productive? And here's what it is, folk. Nobody was allowed to dissent. Now, if you know anything about Western inventions, Colonel Drake drilled for oil in Pennsylvania. I think one of you said you're from Pennsylvania. Colonel Drake drilled for oil. It was called Drake's Folly. He was laughed at. He kept drilling anyway until one day he found oil. Today he's not laughed at. Robert Fulton, they called his steamship Fulton's Folly. They laughed at the idea that a steamship could be practical. Fulton put one together anyway. Inventions are made by people who are free to dissent, to disagree. Now that paper, sample paper I put on iCloud for you to look at was written by a Muslim man who criticized our government so hard because, guess what, folks? In our government, our senators often disagree with our president. Now, isn't that just awful? No, it's not awful, it's wonderful. My wife disagrees with me sometimes, and sometimes I'm better off for it. Often I'm better off for it. The freedom to disagree and the freedom of dissent is necessary if you're going to have any form of invention or any form of technological and scientific and cultural advancement. Somebody comes along and says, hey, there's a better way of doing this. He might be ridiculed, he might be laughed at. Late in the year 1903, a college professor of all things published an article that man could not fly a heavier than air machine. Within weeks, the Wright brothers had flown a heavier than air machine. They read the article. And they did it anyway. Freedom to dissent, which is lacking in the Muslim world. Take the freedom to dissent away. Now, I had a student once ask me, I don't see the connection between being allowed to drink and being a technological advance. Here's the thing, folks. No Muslim is any harder against drinking than I am. No Muslim is any harder against adultery than I am. None of them are any harder against pornography than, but the difference between me and them, there's a big difference. I believe these issues are better off if left to be settled by each individual and not settled by our government. The government should not decide for me whether I'm allowed to die. Personally, I don't touch the stuff I don't want to. Hope I never do. But that's my decision, not the government's. To make my point clear, therefore we have freedom and it has helped us advance. If you want to drink, hey, watch yourself. Just don't do it while you're driving. We can't allow that. And don't do it while you're operating heavy machinery. We can't allow that. But we have freedom that the Muslims do not. Those basically, the government decides your moral standard rather than you decide your own moral standard. And folks, I think that's hindering them and has hindered them and will hinder them for a long time to learn reform. All right. Everybody have a good weekend. It looks like you've been a very attentive class. We'll continue with Islam next week.